Good afternoon and welcome to the Hudson Institute. My name is Adam Mossoff. I'm a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and chair of the Forum for Intellectual Property. Today's fireside chat is hosted by the Forum for Intellectual Property, a new policy center at the Hudson Institute that promotes rigorous data-driven research on the role of intellectual property in both growing innovation economies and fostering flourishing societies. And today's fireside chat exemplifies the Forum for IP's mission, as it brings together thought leaders and representatives from the innovation industries to discuss the key role of patents in making possible both the creation and the commercialization of new innovations that have made modern life a veritable miracle by any historical standard, from our high-tech devices like our smartphones to the vaccines and other medical treatments that have improved everyone's quality of life. Now, we have a special guest moderating our discussion today, and we have the honor to have with us the Honorable Andrei Iancu, former Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. After his public service, he has returned back to his position as partner at the law firm of Irell and Manella, and he is also a senior advisor and co-founder of the Renewing American Innovation Project at the Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington, D.C. He will be engaging today in a discussion with two equal thought leaders and incredible representatives from the innovation industries, Robert DeBerardine, Chief Intellectual Property Counsel of Johnson & Johnson, and Don Rosenberg, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary of Qualcomm, Inc. Director Iancu, thank you for being here, and please, the floor is yours.
Adam, thank you so much for the generous introduction, and thank you to the Hudson Institute for putting on this program, for inviting us to be with you, and really for everything you all do to promote intellectual property and to analyze its impact and importance in the American economy. It's great to be with both of you, Don and Robert. Once again, we've spoken several times in the past, but I think that this format is really a fabulous format for us to engage in a wide-ranging discussion regarding the importance of intellectual property and perhaps patents in particular to the breadth of the U.S. economy. You come from different industries. Robert, obviously, Johnson & Johnson is a major player in biopharma and medical device space. Don, you're in the technology industry. But I think IP plays a meaningful role in both of your industries, and that's the sort of thing we would like to explore during the conversation today. So with that, let me actually start with Don. First of all, welcome.
Great to be here, Andrei. Thank you. And great to be with you again.
Absolutely. So let's just start with perhaps you can describe Qualcomm, your company, what it does, and the importance of intellectual property to the company and perhaps to the industry as a whole.
Well, it's my firm hope that most of the people tuning in to this chat will have some idea of just who and what Qualcomm is and does. I will tell you that starting here about almost 14 years ago now, one of my main goals at the very outset, largely through my government affairs group and some other groups, was to see if we could elevate the profile of Qualcomm. We were literally an unknown entity. In fact, even in San Diego, there were some people who I think thought of us only as the stadium. And of course, the primary reason for that was the fact that we weren't then and still aren't really a consumer-facing company, so we're not well known by name. Other reason for that was frankly Irwin Jacobs, one of our few founders, really did not believe very much in promoting yourself through advertising and marketing, but rather just doing the engineering work, which is terrific when you think about the fact that that has been imbued in the culture of this company right through today, when probably the vast majority of people at Qualcomm have never really engaged with Irwin, who's still very active, by the way, but has been retired for some time from Qualcomm. So with that little introduction, so what we do and what we think of ourselves right from the outset was basically a systems design company. That's something that probably most people don't realize. And we started with a group of engineers who were looking for ways to improve mobile communications back in the mid 80s, which, as you know, was pretty much in its nascent stage. Without going into a lot of detail, and there's a lot of it, it wasn't until the late 90s that we really stepped onto the stage, so to speak, having convinced the world's participants in the standards bodies that CDMA, a technology which Qualcomm had basically, I won't say invented, it existed to some extent, the technology, but found a way to apply it to mobile communications back then. And probably the most significant, there's probably a lot of arguments about this, but because there are so many significant things, but the most significant aspect was how it led to the digital age. We were back in the analog age back then, and CDMA really moved us a step up to really get into what we are today. All of us are using the phone much more than anyone uses the PC to access the internet, to stream, to do all kinds of things with digital technology. Early on, we, as an engineering organization, decided that we need to protect those engineering inventions that we were creating with the patent system in the US and then well beyond the US. And so the patent system, and don't take my word for it because I wasn't around at the early time, but Irwin often talks about how the ability to continue to invest and attract investors was very much dependent on the patent system and our ability to demonstrate that the technology we were inventing would be well protected. And of course, that's a theme that you hear all about in today's environment with the new companies seeking investors. We're a paradigmatic representation of the importance of that. And we started patenting early, though you may not know too that when we decided to protect, we also decided to share, as I like to say. And so engaging with the standards bodies in this industry meant that we contributed the technology that we thought would be appropriate and better than other technologies as the industry evolved. There's a consensus process by which all the participants, and these are worldwide participants today, including thousands of engineers, agree by consensus to accept offered and contributed technology. And the technologist that provides that contribution agrees to license on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms to those who are implementing the full standard. We decided, again, early on, brilliant decision, rather than maintain the proprietary hold on our patents that we could have, we decided to share them by licensing. And we did it through this standards process. We agreed to fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory compensation. And the first couple of companies we licensed, when we had probably not more than 100 or 200 patents, were companies like AT&T and Motorola, who at the time were significant players. I like to tell people that negotiation was not one that the startup Qualcomm had an advantage in. And so when you look at what we agreed to in those agreements, the royalty has pretty much remained exactly the same throughout now 3 decades or more, or less, despite the fact that we now have approximately 140,000 patents and patent applications pending. And I'll shut up in 1 minute to say one more thing, because I've only talked about the licensing business, and maybe we can get to a little more of this later. But by introduction, of course, a significant part of our business is the chip business. And we make chips now for not just the modem, which we started at, but of course, the application processor as well, a system on a chip, And we have now some consumer recognition in the sense that we've named our chips Snapdragon, the Snapdragon family. So let me stop there, even though, as you might imagine, I have a lot more to say and I have trouble limiting myself.
That's a fabulous history in brief, and there's a lot of follow-up to a lot of what you have said, and I want to come back to all of it. But let me just turn over to Robert and ask him the same question from a very different industry. So Robert, from J&J's perspective, you guys are in many different fields. Maybe you can describe that a little bit, but beyond that, how do you use IP or patents in particular to enhance or to support your business practices?
Well, great to be here, Andrei. Thank you. And great to be here with you too, Don. And I know a lot of the Qualcomm story. It's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So J&J is a very broad healthcare company. It services three sectors: consumer, medical device, and farm. Altogether, it has over 80 billion in sales last year. We're in over 175 countries worldwide. And we have a worldwide global force of about 130,000 employees. A rough breakout is consumers about 14 billion in sales, medical devices about 23 billion in sales, and farm is about 45 billion in sales. The patents play an important part, and IP generally. So obviously in consumer, which has a lot of brands that people know about, Listerine, Neutrogena, Band-Aid, Zyrtec, Motrin, Tylenol. Trademark is very big there, of course, but when you're talking about innovation in consumer, patents plays a large role there. So the newer products obviously have more patents than the older products, which are protected better by trademarks. Still IP, still very important. The medical device businesses that we have are around orthopedics and spine. A lot of surgery device for laparoscopic and open surgery, sutures, tools and equipments that surgeons use, and then also some imaging devices that cardiologists use to treat heart disease. And that's a very large business, again, about 23 billion. And then pharmaceuticals, and to Qualcomm, a lot of people, they're not a consumer facing company, so the name is less prevalent unless you're in the industry, of course. Then Qualcomm is a shining light. But same thing with us. People know J&J from consumer, but the largest business that we have is farm, and that's Janssen Pharmaceuticals. And again, that's a lion's share of our business. And we do a lot of work in oncology, immunology, cardiovascular, neuroscience. Key areas, and we have a lot of prevalent drugs in those areas. But again, you don't sort of think of Johnson & Johnson and pharmaceuticals. You think more of the consumer products, but the pharmaceuticals is fairly significant, actually completely significant. And and actually the pharmaceutical story is actually a very interesting story when it comes to the need for patent protection. And Andrei and Don, if it's okay with you, I'm going to share a few slides. And I'll try to keep it short, and I'll try to go through them pretty quickly. So I'm gonna, okay. So Andrei and Don, this sort of, and listeners, this slide is designed to show you sort of the time it takes to develop one pharmaceutical product. You can see it's 10 to 15 years. There's two significant phases. There's a preclinical research phase. That's when you're not working with humans, but you're working in the lab. That takes a number of years. What you're trying to do is you're trying to find a compound that hits a particular biologic target that's going to hopefully modulate the body so that it can deal with a disease state. So you're trying to find a particular compound that matches with a biologic target, and then you're trying to see if I can't solve a problem for people with unmet medical needs. That takes a number of years, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Then if you think that you have a product that might do that and you believe it's safe based upon a lot of testing, then you do a phase 1 trial, which is testing the safety in human beings, and there's very careful dosing And you go into that process. If it looks like it's safe, then you go into clinical trials to see if it's efficacious. It basically, as you get through that whole process, you spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and you can fail at any point in time. And indeed, if you were to look at, these are some numbers over the last, from about 2000 to 2015, where we tracked different successes. And this is once it went into people. So this is the 96 attempts and the 167 attempts and the 75 attempts and the 146. Those are attempts in people. So they were deemed safe enough to give to people, but the question was, would they work? And you can see very, very hard to show that a drug is safe and effective in a person. Before these attempts, there are hundreds of thousands of attempts trying to find an appropriate molecule to hit an appropriate target and to develop that so you can actually give it to a human being safely. So you can see the chance of success is very, very small. And that's why patents are so important. I'm gonna, you can see here that the cost is over $2.6 billion to develop just one drug. And I'm going to go through real quickly the economics and how this works. So you have this timeline. You have a timeline of about 10 to 15 years. You're going to start developing. That's the preclinical work. You're investing money and you're going, and then you go into clinical trials and you're digging a very expensive hole, hundreds of, well, billions of dollars. And then hopefully you're going to get regulatory approval. And when you get regulatory approval, then you can start selling. And that's the one thing that people need to understand about the pharmaceutical industry. You know, you can develop a bad product in other industries and you can sell it. You know, so we've all seen bad movies, and they made the movie. They said, "Oh my gosh!" In fact, when I was younger, it would, you know, you had straight to video movies. Now I guess it's straight to streaming. But you can still try to recoup some money if you have a bad product. In the pharmaceutical world, if you don't have a product that's safe and effective, you don't get to sell it. And so that regulatory approval basically is the point in time when you actually do have a product. And that's the great uncertainty. And you saw from the slide before this, that the chance of that happening is extremely, extremely small. And so you need that regulatory approval before you can even try to start recovering your money. And then, and once you get the regulatory approval, you start selling. And as the sales go on over time, you're recovering more and you're digging yourself out of that hole. Of course, if your product gets copied while it's in that red zone, you're not going to make money, and it's going to be a negative event for the company. Hopefully, at some point, your sales continue and you clear the investment burden, and now you're starting to make some profit, and that's the green area there. And then the green area comes to end in the pharmaceutical world when the patent comes to an end. And that's because in the pharmaceutical world, billions to develop, but once you've developed and shown something is safe and efficacious, it's fairly easy to copy it. And so people are waiting to copy, and what's keeping them from copying are the patents. And those patents are what creates that timeline of opportunity for you to recover enough money to make it a positive financial experience rather than a negative financial experience. But, you know, and this is just to show that regulatory approval is obviously the big uncertainty there. But that's all right. So this is a success, right? This is where we got regulatory approval. But as you saw from the slide before that, earlier slide, most times you're not successful. Most times you have failures. So this one success not only has to cover the investment cost of developing this drug, but it has to cover the investment cost of developing all the failures, which are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the burden on that one successful drug to cover all the R&D expenses of all the products you're trying to get approval for, which obviously are all towards unmet medical needs. So they're all important investments, but only once in a while is something successful. So that requires that your timeline be extended. And so you see that you need more patent time to recover for that one success to cover all the losses and the success investment as well. And so that's why patents are so important, Andrei. because you can see here, if you don't have enough patent time, you're never going to have enough time to make the sales before it's being copied for you to recover your investments. And if you can't cover your investments, you're going to go out of business and you're not going to be able to develop any new drugs. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and thank you for your indulgence.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't, well, okay. I was about to say,
I can go
take the
back to
slides.
it. I can share. You want me to do?
Sure, because I have a couple of follow-up questions before going back to Don. And that is, on this slide, first of all, I understand what you have said, but perhaps you can touch on why is this different than other industries? In other words, in every industry, in the R&D phase, there's failure. And nobody in no industry, I don't think, hits upon the best product right away every single time. So there's always, now maybe not, to this degree, and maybe in other industries, the yellow here, the investment in drug failures is smaller, but it's still there. And then they also can be copied. So why, first of all, do you think that patents are more important to this industry, to the pharma industry, than other industries like consumer and so on? And if so, why?
Yeah, well, great question, Andrei. And the real answer is that regulatory approval, because as you're developing, whether it's a phone or a car or whatever it is, or a new sneaker, as you're going along, there are points in time where you're saying, oh yes, this is really working well. And you can cut your losses if it's not working well, and you can do that fairly soon. And we do that sometimes, obviously, when things turn out not to be safe. But usually the big expense in the farm space is in that clinical trial. And what you're doing is you're doing all this work, and you can't really know whether it's successful or not. And those clinical trials cost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And you can't know if it's successful or not, safe and efficacious, until you're done with the clinical trial. You have all those data, you analyze all those data, and you see if you hit the endpoints that you have negotiated with the FDA. And so it's a completely end of the process loaded yes or no binary decision. And that's what makes it incredibly expensive. But once you know, and if I'm building a car, for instance, and I say, okay, I'm going to add a fifth wheel, and I'm going to see if that fifth wheel is going to be effective. And at some point, I can say, it seems to be working, I'm going to go for it. I can try to file my patents, which are going to be important. But chances are it's not going to be 100% of that automobile. You're still going to be able to sell that car with four wheels if you have to. But in our world, if that drug fails, that $2.5 billion investment is washed away. And then you have to start over again. If you want to try to use that compound for another indication, you have to start all over with your clinical trial. So it's that end result that's very binary, and that is really based after you spent all your money. That really makes it patents so critical. And of course, the longer you wait, the less time you have on your patent, the less likely you are to develop that molecule, because again, you're going to need a long time after the product launches to try to recover your money. So I think it's an investment. I think the investment is much larger, and the investment is made all up front before you find out whether or not you really have a product.
Yeah, but by the way, speaking as a mechanical engineer, probably you should not invest in in a fifth wheel. I just don't think it's a worthwhile investment. But you can take that down. But to pick up on what Robert just said, Don, some folks have used some of that distinction from the pharma world to argue that, okay, we kind of understand that, and we sort of understand the role of patents in that industry and why it's so important to the biopharma world. They have the regulatory process, the binary results, and huge investments upfront, hard to recoup, and so on. But that's very different in the tech world. And folks have used that argument to say, that these two industries behave differently as a result. Is that a valid distinction in your mind, coming from the tech world?
Well, look, there are, sorry, there are certainly differences, but there are a lot of similarities. And it occurred to me as I was listening to Robert's presentation, this may be something that, again, a lot of people really don't know because they don't live in our world. But it takes Qualcomm probably 10 years of research, design work to come up with to be a major contributor to a new generation of mobile communications. Literally from one generation to the next, it's almost a 10-year process. And you start early by investing in technology, design, and development. And you're investing well before you have any sense of A, whether the result will be something that in fact is the next best thing. B, whether even if you think it is, the industry through the standards process that I mentioned earlier will accept it, whether it will be accepted by the standards body and then used by the device makers. And so well before we know those answers, we are investing billions of dollars every year. And it's interesting, it occurred to me too that there's this, I would hope now, discounted notion of so-called patent holdup, which companies like ours have been accused of when you have a patent that's known as now a standard essential patent because it's been included in the technology has been included in the standard. And so people argue that this concept of holdup means you can take advantage of that standard position beyond what the patent itself would provide to you. And that is to say, you would have some more market power, which would give you the opportunity to, quote, hold up any companies that want to license that technology. And they say because it's part of the standard, these companies have no choice. And so you can either refuse to license them or charge them too much. It's an absurd yet somehow continued to be accepted concept. And the history of our industry puts it to rest very clearly, as we did, for example, in the recent FTC case. So when you look at facts, when you look at empirical data, you realize that the concept of holdup just doesn't hold water, so to speak. There is another concept, a kind of mirror image of that called holdout, which I'll talk about in a second, which clearly is a problem for the industry. So back to holdup and how it relates to Robert's points. So why is it clear that there is no holdup? Well, again, the history of the industry shows that. Two, as I mentioned before, we've established a licensing rate for our patents that goes back to the very earliest days of our licensing program. And we have not raised it. Indeed, as I say, we've lowered it. It's lowered even more because, as I said, we've gone from a couple of hundred patents to 140,000 patents without raising that price. So it just doesn't happen. Holdout, on the other hand, is committed by companies who use our devices, who use our inventions, and who say to themselves, well, I know that the FRAND requirement says Qualcomm has to license on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. Another reason why holdup doesn't hold water. And I know that Qualcomm has essentially given up, at least in the first instance, its right of exclusivity. That's obviously the key to patent protection because they've agreed to license on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms, as opposed to the kind of demands that are made by some other companies when they sue for patent infringement. But the implementer may say, well, yeah, I just don't want to pay that much, whatever it is. And I'll just go ahead and use the technology because, of course, when you patent something, it's all published, it's all there, as you know, Andre, better than anybody. We've had to publish a detailed specification. We've had to talk about our claims. We've had to limit our claims. We've had to create a perfect record for anybody who wants to follow the map. So they can do that. They can literally infringe with impunity if they choose to, except for the fact that we have one recourse, which is to sue if they refuse to pay. And of course, we all know that the process of suing is expensive, consumes resources, and takes a long time. And that's what the implementer who commits the holdout knows as well. So they say to themselves, the calculus is pretty easy. And by the way, they've given it a name. They've called it efficient infringement, which basically says, you know what? I'm going to infringe. I may be sued. They may have enough money to sue me. It'll take a long time. At the end of the day, patent litigation is still somewhat iffy. And so I could win. And I may not have ever to pay. But if I lose, well, it's years down the road. And chances are, especially because of the difficulty of getting injunctions in the United States these days, chances are I'll just have to pay what I would have had to pay in the first place. So this is pretty efficient. This is pretty cost effective. And this is what we deal with. And I worry that if patent protection and patent value continues to be diminished, then that notion of holdout will take real hold on the system. And at the end of the day, as we all know, what it will ultimately do is inhibit the desire or ability to innovate. From an antitrust competition perspective, it will only raise prices, not reduce prices, or there won't be any more additional growth in the efficiency of the technology and the performance.
Just to push back a little bit on that, some folks out there, especially increasingly so nowadays, especially in the academic world, are saying, but why do you need patents done at all from that perspective? In other words, if you have a great product, why don't you just compete on the quality of your product and all other types of market success, first entry, size, distribution channels, marketing, and ultimately, again, the quality and innovation in the product itself?
Well, there's so many reasons why that's just wrong. I hope I can at least touch on a few of the important ones. First of all, I mean, that flies in the face, as you know, of the whole notion of the patent system, which of course has been with us since the Constitution, and before that, actually. So to me, it's just absurd on its face. Second is, most of the people who make those arguments are what I put in the category of very successful companies, usually vertical companies, who have a strong market position due to their use of technology in the implementation of that technology. And they rely very heavily on, as do, and I include in that group the people who support them, even from the academic community, whether they're economists or in the legal community. They depend on that position of strength to protect their position, and the fact that they have such a loyal following, the fact that they've been able to take the inventions and create appealing implementations gives them the ability to continue to capitalize for quite some time without concern about entry of others, because it's so difficult to enter when you're faced with a company that has so much market presence. When you look at companies like Qualcomm, we live in a very fast moving industry. So yes, we absolutely believe that we have to constantly move faster than our competitors. We have to move fast because the window between our first entry with a product that is designed to our inventions and the people who then come and follow it with competitive products is smaller and smaller. And so we know that there will be those who come out behind us very quickly. We know that they will use what we have described in our patents to be able to produce those competitive devices. And we still have the strength of the patent for several years to be able to collect royalties through our device level royalty licensing business model, and want to use that to recover that enormous investment that I just described that we made well before we had any idea that that this product would be successful.
Yeah. I've noticed, and this is an overgeneralization, of course, but I've noticed that entities that generally make those types of arguments and on average advocate against stronger intellectual property systems are well established, dominant with companies with dominant market presence, and therefore can rely on other market conditions in order to succeed, and they don't need the intellectual property that might help startups and other disruptive type of technologies. But having said that, here I am talking to two fairly established companies, to say the least. And yet, interestingly enough, for your companies in two different areas, as well as others like yours, well-established companies, IP is important to them still. Is there a distinction that you can draw from all that? You know, some folks argue it's tech on one side, pharma on the other side, but it doesn't seem to be quite the correct distinction, does it? So what, neither is large company versus small company. So what exactly?
Before Robert goes, I just want to say, for us, remember, we're in a fairly unique position because I've talked mostly about our licensing program of our patents, but we have a very strong hardware business, chip business. And while the patents clearly are important to protect us there as well, we are very competitive. We have established through the fact that we have what we believe is the best product. And so even without the patent, we think we would be winning the business. Indeed, we don't rely on the patents to support our chip business in the sense of winning sales. That's not what defines our competitiveness. So we're kind of on both sides of this. But again, our hardware is really all about the technological horizontal layer, to go back to your point, where we distribute that across many players in the industry versus competing with the major players in the device area. So I think that's a little distinction that we should keep in mind.
Yeah, Robert, thoughts?
Yeah, so Andrei, if you listen to Don and how he described what he needs to do to develop a new protocol for a new chipset, perhaps, or whatever it is they're developing, and the same thing for us, the investment it takes to, I look at each pharmaceutical product as a startup, because you're starting with nothing and you're trying to build a business out of it. And so there's this huge investment that goes into it. And if you're successful, once Don explains how he does his thing, and if it's not patented, and once we do what we do, it's easy for someone to copy that and enter the marketplace. And so, in order to recover that investment in that startup, again, the pharmaceutical that doesn't exist, and taking it through a $2.5 billion journey over 14 years to see if you come up with a product that could be sold, you need that patent protection no matter what your size is. You know, if my product doesn't work, the FDA is not going to say, well, you're Johnson & Johnson, you're a big company, go ahead and sell it. That's never going to happen. And so it doesn't matter how big I am. What matters is how good that one product is, how much does it cost to build that product, and how easy is it to copy that product. And my size doesn't matter. If I'm a designer company, you know, and I make a crummy garment, people will still buy it because of the name. I know people that spend thousands of dollars on purses, where I see a purse that costs $50 and it looks like the same purse to me. The only thing that's different is that emblem on the purse. And so there you say, okay, market size, market presence, recognition is super important, and maybe patents aren't. But no one's going to take a pharmaceutical that doesn't work for them and say, well, I'll take it because it's Johnson & Johnson. I like the name. That just doesn't happen. And I'm sure that doesn't happen in Don's business either.
Given the time, let me turn to a couple of items that have made fairly big news, actually the popular media, which is unusual for the patent system, but here we are in today's world. So while we're with you, Robert, let me ask you about a proposed waiver of intellectual property rights that is currently circulating at WTO, the World Trade Organization. Folks will probably know that India and South Africa a few months ago, and now recently joined by other countries, have proposed that intellectual property rights with respect to copyrights, trade secrets, industrial designs, and patents be waived with respect to COVID-19 technologies worldwide, and that the TRIPS agreement surrounding those, which is the trade agreement, multilateral trade agreement, be waived for those types of technologies. More recently, the Biden administration has indicated that it supports at least engaging in text-level discussions surrounding the proposed waiver. So let me ask you, Robert, if this were to take place, what impact would this have on biopharmaceutical innovation? And obviously, it's not lost on anyone that Johnson & Johnson is one of the 3 main providers of vaccines in the United States, and also obviously provides vaccines on a global basis.
Yeah, Andre, so first I want to say that the premise of that proposal is completely wrong. You could waive the IP on everything in the world, and it wouldn't bring another vaccine to the market. It wouldn't help anyone produce those vaccines. The real limitation on vaccines, and you're seeing it today, is, if you read the articles, we were ready to ship vaccine to a country in Africa, and they didn't have the refrigeration equipment to be able to hold it and distribute it appropriately. And so the issue with the vaccines is not the fact that people are waiting with vaccines that they're ready to sell, and somehow IP is preventing them from doing that. In fact, that is the exact opposite. Even the people that have the technology, the proven technology, the proven products, are having a hard time finding all the resources they need, and also the healthcare infrastructure you need to get those products out to the people in need in a safe and effective way. And so that, to me, and this is my own perspective, it's using a crisis, a very significant crisis, to attack IP in a very unfair way, because the premise is completely wrong. The other thing I want to say, Andre, is that each week we're hearing about more and more solutions that are going to be approved to deal with the COVID-19 virus. Some of those are treatments, and some of those are additional vaccines. And what's IP has driven all those solutions, and that's what you want. You didn't want one vaccine and then have everybody copy that one vaccine, because that just gives patients and doctors one choice. And if that one choice doesn't happen to work for you, you're in big trouble. What you want is patients and doctors to have many choices, especially around something significant like a COVID-19 vaccine, a virus that can cause incredible damage globally. So the fact that we're going to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 different treatments and or vaccines to attack the COVID-19 virus. And also it will prove very important when there are mutations, which there will be, viruses mutate, and to have multiple opportunities to use multiple proven safe and effective products against new variants of the COVID-19 vaccine of a virus is going to be very, very important for humankind. And so the incentive of the IP a process that has created all this unique innovation that is leading to unique products and creating competition between unique solutions is really shows that the patent system is working and working extremely well.
But to follow up on that, so some argue that you don't need the patent system to incentivize you to make vaccines to save humanity. Companies like Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, some of the very substantial vaccine manufacturers out there. There are resources already sufficient to enable you to invest and save human lives. B, just the incentive to save human lives. The argument is this is a historic, once in a century crisis. You would do this anyway, and isn't there some truth to that? And if that's the case, then the proponents say, well, why not waive? They're going to produce them anyway. Companies like J&J and Pfizer and so on, they're going to produce them anyway for all these other reasons. Plus, if you waive, then some other companies, vaccine manufacturers in other countries can pick it up and make more of the same. That would be the argument.
So there are 2 points to that. First of all, the IP that generated all these solutions was not built around COVID-19. It was built around other disease states that people were trying to solve, whether it was immune system responses, other viruses. And so what it did was it gave the industry a jump start. The patent system that encouraged people to try to solve multiple different problems across multiple different disease states created an incredible infrastructure of opportunity to try to apply those proprietary and diverse solutions to the COVID-19 problem. And indeed, in J&J's case, we're providing our vaccine at a not-for-profit basis during the pandemic. And so we are not using IP to drive any price for our COVID-19 vaccine. But what the patent system did was allow J&J, and we tried multiple solutions, by the way. We looked at our mechanical device businesses, and we looked for solutions there, respirators, those types of things. We looked across consumer to see if we had consumer products that might help with COVID-19. And we looked across farm immunology and antiretrovirals that we have for HIV. And then we looked at our vaccine to see if we couldn't find a solution, and the vaccine worked for us. But it was that infrastructure and that diverse infrastructure across all of healthcare that was encouraged by the patent system that allowed that solution. It wasn't trying to make money off of COVID-19 that got these companies involved. It was the good that got them to take their technology that was being developed for other disease states or other problems and apply it to COVID-19. And that's why you ended up with solutions in under a year. And and you saw the timeline I showed you earlier. Usually it's 10 to 14 years to come up with a product for a disease state, and we came up with multiple solutions, and we still are in under a year and a half. And that's really an amazing story. And again, the other thing is that the IP is not preventing anyone anyone else from doing this. There are all sorts of non-patented products that people can be testing to see if it works for COVID-19. They're just not doing it. A lot of the people and a lot of the governments were in the same position as everyone when the DNA sequence was published in January of 2020, everyone was starting from square one, the same square one. And what really made the difference is that some companies had the dedication and had the proprietary information to apply to the problem to come up with solutions. But there was nothing stopping India or South Africa or any other country from trying to solve this problem in January 2020. And for them, and for people that didn't try to come and say, now we want to grab all your IP. And by the way, that IP is relevant to other products that are necessary to keep the companies in business, not to COVID-19. And to grab that and share that with the world, it would put a lot of companies out of business. And so that's inappropriate. And my last point, Andre, is this. This is the one-off now, COVID-19. But what's the next one-off? So when COVID-19 is a problem, is cancer a one-off? Is that a global pandemic?
So that's a great segue, because while the current discussion is with respect to waiving IP rights regarding COVID-19 technologies, folks who are concerned about that are concerned that with implications on innovation well beyond COVID-19. So certainly innovation in the biopharma space, in other technologies, other diseases, but also beyond biopharma. So Don, are you concerned that if a waiver like this takes place for this crisis, are you concerned with the impact on IP in general that might implicate your industry as well?
So I don't want to step over the line, because I'm learning as much as we all are from listening to Robert, even though I know quite a bit about the arguments made here. But I would say this, my first reaction to this was quite negative. The problem, of course, is, as Robert has indicated and knows well, it certainly has great appeal to people, because no one wants to see disease untreated if there is a treatment possibility. And but on the other hand, first of all, I actually, as a practical matter, thought that it was an interesting rhetorical point, but I didn't think it was going to produce anything immediately. But what it would do would contribute to this ongoing effort to disqualify the patent system, degrade the patent system, weaken the patent system, and that really troubles me.
With that in mind, let me just segue into your more specific industry. The United States was long a leader in semiconductors, just like we have been in the biopharma space. But here we are, another piece of current news is that there is a shortage of semiconductors. I'm trying to buy a dishwasher, seriously, and they're not available because they don't have chips to put into them nowadays. And it's in other industries too. So, Congress recently, at least the Senate, passed the U.S. Competitiveness and Innovation Act. There's all sorts of talk about increasing U.S. innovation in this area and production. From your perspective, where are we with the patent system vis-a-vis all of that? Folks don't seem to be making the connections that those two things are interrelated.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Of course, the supply chain issues, both in our industry and elsewhere, are too big to get into in the next 3 minutes. But there's a lot of reasons, in addition to the crises that we're dealing with these days, as to why we're facing a chip supply issue in our industry, across the industries where semiconductors are used. And so there's a lot that has to be done. But yes, like so many things, an emergency appears and we react. So there's now legislation afoot to try to see if these problems can be fixed, if the trends can be reversed, if we can become less dependent on a foreign supply chain model and be more self-sufficient here in the US. By the way, that's what China is doing as well. But I do think, as you imply, I think from your question, that there is, again, I have real fear that that what we're not considering is the value of intellectual property as it relates to encouraging innovation, as it relates to encouraging investment in innovation. And we don't spend enough time in our efforts in thinking about that. Indeed, I will tell you from my experience over the last 10 or 12 years, it's been quite ironic to me, and I've seen this over that period of time. I've been in China many times, starting in about 2010, pushing and prodding China to respect and accept intellectual property rights, improve intellectual property rights. And they have made steady progress, at least from where they were. At the same time, as we all know, here in the US, it's been a kind of a reverse process. That is, many things have happened to reduce the strength of the intellectual property system here, which, as I say, seems quite ironic. So I'm urging whomever I get to speak to in Washington to continue to remember that while we're anxious to work on the semiconductor industry and the supply chain, a big piece of that needs to be continuing support for research and development. And continuing support for research and development, in my mind, translates in large part to protecting intellectual property rights and encouraging innovation and invention.
Yeah, Andrei, on that point on China, real quickly, a lot of people don't know this, but the Chinese government was actually paying companies to file patents in China because they recognize how important intellectual property is to their desire to be, a global leader in commerce.
Yeah, certainly. So that's a perfect way to end. And, I very much, as the two of you, I think, welcome the significant attention on increasing American innovation and increasing the output of research and development and investments in R&D. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our intellectual property systems are secure, lest all of those investments and efforts can seep away and not be as helpful as they should be for the United States in the long run. So with that, I thank you very much, Don and Robert, for this fascinating conversation. I really, I think we could keep going on here for hours. Let me turn it over to Adam. Excellent.
And I really want to thank all three of you for a very informative and engaging discussion about the key function of patents as a launching pad for creating new inventions and for creating the business models for and commercial mechanisms necessary to convert, the inventions in the lab into real-world innovations that benefit people the world over. I mean, this fireside chat between the three of you was exactly the type of evidence-based discussion about patents and innovation policy that we really seek to sponsor and promote through the Forum for Intellectual Property at the Hudson Institute. For those of our audience who enjoyed the discussion, I further recommend visiting the Forum for Intellectual Property website to find further information on research and videos of past events that support and reaffirm many of the points made by our speakers today, especially a recent policy memo by Professor Jonathan Barnett called How IP Rights Keep Markets Free, which presents this theoretical and empirical research that underscores the importance of the points made today by all of our speakers. Thank you again, and I really look forward to returning back to in-person events with all three of you in the near future.
Thank you, Andrei.
Thanks,
Robert, and thank you, Adam, for organizing this.